time. Alto to Angliru is a climb that doesn't need much introduction. Widely considered the hardest ascent in professional road racing, the relentlessly steep inclines make even the best cyclists in the world look like they're moving in slow motion. The gradients encountered over the course of the 13 kilometers look almost implausible on paper. So, naturally, Angliru had been my number one bucket list climb for a while. Despite hosting one of the most notorious climbs in the world, the north coast of Spain isn't a particularly popular or well-known cycling destination. In fact, Angliru was the only climb I'd heard of in the region. But over the course of 7 days spent in Asturias and Cantabria, I ended up having some of the best experiences I've had on a bike. It was also absurdly challenging, and I found myself struggling to stay upright on just about every ride. The next few videos will cover this craziness, starting with the first 2 days, Peña Cabarga and Angliru. We were based near Santander, so it required quite a bit of driving to get to the most major mountains in Asturias, but did allow for access to the eastern Cantabrian mountains, as well as nice beaches for non-cycling stuff. Upon arrival, it was immediately evident why the region is known as Green Spain, and is very green. It was very wet. No! But the following morning was a lovely hot day, so I made it out for a short ride up Peña Cabarga. Peña Cabarga sits near the coast, not far from the airport, and has a communications tower and lookout at the summit, which you can pick out from miles away. It stands on its own, so it's an out and back road, and it's always quite cool to be able to see something and point out right where you're going. To get to the climb, you have to ride along this dead straight, dead flat carriageway, but as soon as you peel off at this roundabout, the road kicks straight up without anything to ease you into it. It averages around 9% for just under 6 kilometers, but that includes a short flat section about 2/3 of the way up, so most of the climbing is safely in the double digits. I chose to do this climb on the first day because it was fairly nearby and fairly short. I was really keen to do Angliru as soon as possible, but begrudgingly accepted that it probably wasn't wise to leap straight into it, right off the back of a string of tough days in the Pyrenees. So I thought that this climb of about 500 meters would be a nice way to shake off some fatigue before tentatively attacking Angliru the following day. This is just the one bit of navigation of the entire climb. You actually continue along the same road, but there's a fork and have to stay left, which I almost didn't do. I love these kind of gradients of around 11-12%, but on a road like this, when you can see it rearing up ahead of you, it really felt like I was moving in slow motion. I did want to be in decent condition for Angliru, so I didn't want to go too hard up here, but I also knew that there was no way to prevent myself from going too hard up here. I figured that it was a short enough effort that it probably wouldn't do too much damage, so I settled into a tough but relatively comfortable and sustainable pace. About halfway up, you start to get good views over to the left. Still none of the sea yet, but those will come shortly when the road swings around. This flat section, which actually starts with a little downhill, is around half a mile long and took a couple of minutes to get through. But it's actually a nice opportunity to ease off a bit before hitting this last section, which is the toughest bit of the whole climb. You're momentarily kind of enveloped in trees and lose sense of where the summit is, and then it kicks up quite aggressively, which caught me by surprise as I hadn't studied the profile too well. I thought I was nearly at the top, but it took almost 10 minutes from that plateau, and with some sections in excess of 15%, it was quite tough going. But this is where you start to get phenomenal views of Santander and the Cantabrian Sea, and I was just absolutely loving it. I think this climb makes a great warm-up or opening ride if you're visiting the region and looking to tackle some of the brutal HCs. It's more contained than many of the wild ones to come, but it gets you used to the sharp gradients. The Vuelta has finished up here a few times, and you can see why it would make an awesome summit finish. There are lots of animals roaming around too, including the C word, but I was spared any head-on encounters on this occasion. So I climbed Peña Cabarga in about 23 minutes. Another recovery/primer day gone completely wrong, but whatever, it was loads of fun and served as a perfect psychological preparation for the large mountain that awaited me the following day. It's Angliru time! With weather still looking decent the following morning, we drove a few hours to the bottom of the climb in Riosa, which lies between Picos de Europa and Semedo Natural Park. I was bouncing with excitement, but it turned into dread when it started spitting with rain as we neared our destination. I knew that it'd be a challenge just to make it up the inclines without the additional difficulties of wet roads, but thankfully it lifted as we headed further inland. The weather of the region proved to be a bit of an enigma throughout our entire trip. We were constantly surrounded by these really threatening looking clouds sitting on top of the mountains just inland, and we never knew quite what they were going to do. But today, at least, they did what we wanted. I warmed up for a few minutes before returning to the car park, where I had a gel and got ready to set off whilst being hit with another round of nerves. Have a good drive.
Alright, enjoy.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna start nice and easy. Start nice and easy. The start slow mantra is something I chant before every single effort, yet never ever managed to do. But for Angliru it was to be particularly important, as the real nasty stuff lies in the second half of the climb. On first glance, Angliru doesn't actually look that bad, averaging just under 11% for 13 kilometers. But when you zoom in on that profile, you'll see that it's not quite a nice consistent grind from bottom to top. The first 6 kilometers average only about 6.5%, so to get that average up to double-digit figures, well, the last few miles are a bit extreme. This was a climb that I'd been dreaming of riding for ages, and although I didn't have a particular goal time in mind, I wanted to give it my best crack. On a climb with a profile like this, you ideally want to be pushing out the most watts where it'll have the most impact, which would be in the second half. But the first few kilometers are still a reasonable gradient, and I wanted to be pressing on a bit. So my pacing strategy was to ride comfortably hard for the first 20 minutes, and then uncomfortably hard for the rest of it. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I have a real issue with doing this no matter the distance. Whether it's an Everesting or a 3-minute hill climb, I'll probably overcook it too early and end up dragging myself over the line. The mild nature of this first section feels a bit at odds with what you expect from climbing the mighty Angliru. Of course that would all change soon, but I just wanted to get onto the ridiculous stuff. And the fact that you know it's going to get ridiculous makes it hard to enjoy this objectively nice stretch of road. Navigation wasn't as straightforward as you might expect, with lots of roads peeling off here and there, so I would recommend having a route loaded up. As usual, I was riding by feel, and navigation was all I had displayed on my Garmin, but every now and then I flipped to the power screen to make sure that I wasn't accidentally going way too easy. I really had the urge to press on more, but as you can see my heart rate was already pretty high, and my power was also higher than I had planned. I find it really difficult to break free from the mindset that as soon as I start an effort, I should be right on the limit. Obviously it's not practical for a climb close to an hour long, but I feel like I'm not trying hard enough if the effort isn't immediately extremely uncomfortable. Kilometer markings start appearing after you pass Porcio, and from here the road narrows and you can sense that you're getting close to the meat of the climb. This was where I started to feel quite tired. Any adrenaline had worn off, and my comfortably hard pace had turned uncomfortable quite a while ago. I had been concerned about climbing up into wet conditions, but it was actually quite sunny and hot. And yep, sure enough, I had set out too hard. Did not. Start nice and easy. I'm gonna start nice and easy. Not to the extent that I was in danger of blowing up, but I was coming to the end of the easy part with a heart rate already in the 190s. This flat stretch is about 1 kilometer long and took me a couple of minutes. This probably would have been a good opportunity to ease off and try to recover slightly, but I kept the pressure on for reasons unknown. And then I saw the road kick up ahead of me and thought, yep, okay, this is Angliru. I wanted to attack the climb when it got steep, but no attacking occurred, it was merely survival. And that's what it would be for the next 35 minutes. All of a sudden it felt like an entirely different effort from the first 20 minutes. I wasn't even sitting on the bike in the same way. I was really not feeling great and regretted expending too much energy on the lower slopes, but in some ways the pure absurdity of it made the exertion easier. I didn't have to think about pacing or force myself to keep on the pressure. There was no choice but to just do what I could to keep moving. This was when my heart rate first hit 200, which is quite alarming when you see how little progress I've made. But the climb had taken on that really spectacular, isolated mountain road kind of feel, which I just love. Along with kilometre and gradient signs, there are also these information markers along the way, which provide a bit of history in a cycling context. It was cool to have this quite solo experience, climbing this wild road on a deserted day, whilst having that awareness of its reputation within the cycling world. I was moving so slowly that I probably would have had time to read them as I crawled fast, but unfortunately my focus was elsewhere. My dad drove to the top, which I'm sure was a much more harrowing experience than cycling it. I like to think he enjoys experiencing these climbs this way since we can't cycle them together anymore, but I'm not sure that's true. The amount of difficulty the car has is a good metric in determining how tough a climb is though, and as always, I massively appreciate the support. The road was a bit cratery in places, or at least it was when I did it. The Vuelta raced up here a few months later, so they might have patched it up since. But I don't remember it being too much of a hindrance, possibly because I encountered some much worse surfaces a few days later. You might be wondering, is this really her idea of fun? And questioning why I was so excited to do this. This was basically some of my favourite bits of cycling bundled into 13 kilometres. Long efforts, super steep stuff, and quiet, beautiful roads. I rode Monte Zoncolan last year, which has a similar reputation, but is widely regarded as only the second hardest climb in road racing, number one being this one. There are doubtlessly steeper and longer climbs, but while discovering hidden beasts also brings me great joy, there's something special about attacking one that's recognised and feared worldwide. Angliru really first popped onto my radar thanks to Simon Warren's Cycling Climbs of Wales book. The hardest climb featured is the Cowlid in North Wales, and the description says, "I haven't been in so much trouble on two wheels since I rode the Angliru in northern Spain." That phrase got stuck in my head, and ever since I've been wanting to see just how bad it is, and whether it lives up to all the hype. My greatest fear ahead of Angliru was actually not the severe inclines, but the source of all this road garnishing. There are a lot of cows roaming the roads in Asturias, and they frequently wander onto the climb, so I was terrified that I'd turn the corner to see a whole load of them blocking the way. It was a very valid fear as well because I came across a few on the descent, but thankfully they cheered me on from the sidelines on the way up. The section I'm just starting is called La Cuena Les Cabras, and it's the most difficult part of the entire climb. A handy sign lets you know what you're in for, and although I knew some of the most brutal gradients lay quite close to the summit, I was a little taken aback when I hit them. Being faced with 5 minutes at over 21% this deep into an effort was pretty rough, and it was actually one of my lowest power outputs of the entire climb. That's obviously the opposite of what you want to be doing on the steepest section, but I found it difficult to pedal properly against such a gradient. I was probably pushing out some pretty big watts through my biceps, just wrestling with the bike. I think that's how it works. It was the only time I thought I might have to execute some emergency unclipping as my cadence threatened to drop below 50. You can see the clouds rolling in. I was really fortunate to get this much visibility because it came in really quickly when I was descending. And this was a photo I took just 20 minutes later. From here there was another 10 minutes of climbing left, but some of these gradients felt almost flat compared to that previous section. Jesus, Jesus.
Hop up.
I was really curious about how Angliru would stack up against Blann, and I'd say that Angliru is harder in the sense that there was a real threat of having to put a foot down, whereas Blann was never so steep that that was a worry. But it does have more variations in gradient, unlike Blann, which is just relentless from bottom to top. Broadly speaking, Angliru is probably a more fun climb to ride, but from the perspective of trying to do an effort, I didn't enjoy those first 20 minutes very much. So they're both absolute beasts in different ways, and both absolutely wonderful. And to answer the question of whether it lived up to its reputation, absolutely. It's hideously difficult, and I was certainly in trouble on two wheels. Finally it starts to level out, and then you have to sort of almost go downhill a bit to reach the official summit, which is a bit of a weird finale. After so long hunched over, the sensations were super weird and my body couldn't quite remember how to pedal against a normal gradient, but it opened up to a seriously beautiful landscape unlike anywhere else I've been. The verified segment, including that little downhill at the end, took me about 53 minutes, somewhere around 5.3 watts per kilogram. I was slightly disappointed with the effort, mainly because I felt that I'd mispaced it. I'd wanted my power graph to look something like this, but it ended up being very evenly paced from bottom to top. Since this ride, I've competed in numerous hill climb races and set off too hard in all of them, so maybe it's time to just accept the inevitability of it. But all of that aside, I completely loved Angliru. It was as awesome, difficult, and beautiful as I'd hoped.
Again.
Something else I enjoyed throughout my time in Asturias is depicted in this mural by Caesar Frey, traditional Asturian cider pouring. So that concludes the first 2 days. I thought I'd now face the hardest climb of the trip, but we'll see about that.